from scratch, a vibrant local timber industry. It did not happen overnight. We brought together local timber industry players and attracted foreign investors to create a competitive timber processing ecosystem. For this ecosystem to flourish, we attracted foreign investors, establishing linkages across the whole value chain, organizing trade shows for hosted companies to showcase and market their timber products, and boosting exports. GSE's Wood Cluster is now composed of 90 companies operating from the first to the third transformation of timber. All of them transforming ethically and sustainably sourced Gabonese wood. In less than 10 years, Gabon shifted from a net log exporter to the first exporter of veneer in Africa and second in the world. In fact, the real impact was much wider and more meaningful. With GSES, Arise IIP has created 16,000 jobs, attracted 120 investors coming from 18 different countries, operating in 19 industry sectors. In Togo, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire, our work is underway, following the same approach. Cotton, cashew, soya, cocoa. We enable the transformation of local agricultural products with modern infrastructures and integrated logistics services. By investing in local manufacturing, we ultimately seek to replace foreign imports with domestic production. In all our endeavors, we are driven by the pursuit of green, sustainable growth, one that can last for generations to come. We are the pioneer of a green, responsible industrialization, one that ensures gender diversity, sustainability, traceability, and a zero-waste policy. This is why we create innovative solutions that support a climate-conscious economic development in Africa. This starts with neutralizing carbon emissions and creating a positive environmental legacy. By 2022, all of Arise IIP's industrial zones will be carbon neutral, powered fully by solar technology. This is all made possible by the dedication and commitment of the women and men who work at Arise. Together, we are on a journey to build an African industry, a journey to create a better, more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive future for everyone.
Dans ce contexte actuel de crise sanitaire mondiale liée à la pandémie de la COVID-19, il s'avère fondamental de relever la participation des femmes dans tous les maillons de la production, d'encourager et de renforcer leur leadership et leur résilience pour favoriser leur autonomisation, surtout dans le domaine économique. TechnoServe Bénin et l'Agence territoriale de développement agricole Pôle 4 s'inscrivent activement dans cette dynamique. À cet effet, le 15 et 16 octobre 2020, s'est tenue dans la salle de conférence de l'ATDA Pôle 4 à Parakou une cérémonie de célébration de la Journée internationale de la femme rurale édition 2020. Cette journée a pour objectif de définir les modalités de mise en œuvre d'une stratégie de renforcement du leadership et d'une résilience plus accrue des femmes dans les différentes activités de développement socio-économique.
Dans la plupart des décisions, ces femmes-là ne bénéficient pas des avantages qui sont liés au développement économique de chaque pays. Donc, pour les valoriser davantage, la communauté internationale a dédié la journée du 15 octobre pour les célébrer. Comme nous sommes en partenariat avec des programmes, ils ont décidé de nous accompagner pour pouvoir célébrer l'événement au niveau local. Ces femmes-là sont aussi présentes surtout au niveau du maillon transformation. C'est pourquoi nous leur avons demandé de ne pas venir seulement pour écouter les discours, mais qu'elles viennent avec leur chef-d'œuvre pour qu'on puisse voir ce qu'elles font et les gens vont aussi profiter pour se ravitailler.
En effet, dans sa stratégie de renforcement des capacités des acteurs de la filière Cashew, TechnoServe, à travers Bénin Cashew, fournit des assistances techniques spécifiques et appropriées à la satisfaction des besoins des partenaires du public et du privé afin de promouvoir la production des noix brutes d'anacarde, notamment ceux des femmes.
Les braves femmes rurales sont effectivement à l'honneur aujourd'hui. Nous les félicitons et nous les exhortons à mettre leur résilience au service de nos communautés, surtout en cette période de pandémie. Et nous voulons les rassurer du soutien de TechnoServe pour une plus grande intégration du genre dans les chaînes de valeur de la filière anacarde.
Rappelons qu'au cours de cette messe agricole et rurale de haute facture, diverses autorités ont accompagné la TDA et TechnoServe à accélérer les meilleures innovations des produits dérivés du cajou et renforcer les aptitudes des femmes leaders et résilientes dans la filière cajou. Aussi faut-il le souligner, l'ambiance a été motivante et festive, marquée par 2 temps forts, portant notamment sur les réflexions et les partages d'expériences sur la résilience des femmes dans la chaîne de valeur anacarde et l'exposition vente des meilleures innovations réussies en faveur des femmes dans le développement socio-économique.
C'est grâce à Bénin Cajou que ça a été organisé dans le Nord, précisément à Parakou. Et ça a permis aux femmes des 2 Nord de participer. Je veux dire à Takora Donga, Bongo, Albori, Zoukoline, du centre aussi. Voilà pourquoi je tiens à remercier très sincèrement Bénin Cajou. Et cette séance aujourd'hui nous permet, elle nous a permis de partager les expériences des autres femmes. C'est déjà un plus pour nous. Et pour nous qui sommes arrivés, je nous demande à notre retour de passer l'information à celles qui ne sont pas venues, pour qu'elles puissent aussi être informées de ce que nous sommes venus faire. C'est ce qui manque souvent. Et ça fait que les informations, nous les gardons et les autres n'ont plus d'informations aussi. Ça ne permet pas un développement du groupe. Donc je nous demande de souvent communiquer, de partager l'information avec les autres femmes aussi de nos groupes.
Notons que dans la vision de travailler pour une véritable accélération et intégration de la filière cajou au Bénin, avec une part conséquente pour les femmes, l'intégration du genre constitue l'un des principaux axes d'intervention de TechnoServe via le projet Bénin Cajou.
Le projet Bénin Cajou a inscrit dans ses priorités, à compter de l'année 2019, des activités pour la sensibilisation des acteurs en vue d'une meilleure prise en compte de l'intégration du genre dans les différents maillons de la production. C'est à ce titre qu'après avoir milité en amont par un plaidoyer auprès de la FENAPAB pour l'amendement des textes en faveur d'une plus grande intégration du genre, Bénin Cajou a soutenu en aval le processus de renouvellement des organes de gestion de la FENAPAB, qui s'est achevé le 23 septembre 2019 avec l'élection à sa tête d'une femme, Madame Saadatou Atta Kakayachi, en tant que présidente du conseil d'administration.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes, surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
Mariée et mère de 3 enfants, Madame Saadatou est propriétaire de 5 plantations d'anacardiers de 7 hectares et demi à Pénésoulou dans la commune de Bassila, à 372 km de Cotonou. Entrée dans la production du cajou depuis 1998 et précédemment chef quartier, cette mère dévouée gère en subsidiaire son restaurant, son commerce de savon et mène des œuvres sociales en faveur des orphelins de son arrondissement. Brave et vaillante, elle exhorte son équipe et les femmes dans la filière cajou à se battre pour pousser loin la filière.
Pour réussir ma mission, c'est un engagement efficace de l'équipe. Ensuite aussi, il y a la disponibilité que toutes les femmes adhèrent aux coopératives de leur localité, entretenir bien les champs disponibles, celles qui n'en ont pas encore n'ont qu'à produire et surtout faire la vente groupée.
Le directeur général de la Fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin, FENAPAB, explique ici les raisons qui ont soutenu cette action d'éclat manifestée par l'élection d'une femme à la présidence du conseil d'administration de la FENAPAB.
Depuis la création de la FENAPAB en 2006, elle a été gérée par les hommes. Déjà en septembre 2019, les hommes et les femmes ont souhaité mettre maintenant les femmes à la tête de cette organisation pour gérer ces deux organes-là, conseil d'administration et conseil de surveillance.
La commune de Basila n'est pas restée en marge de ce processus car la mairie s'est illustrée récemment dans des actes forts en faveur des femmes pour la filière cajou.
Il faut dire que c'est un honneur pour nous et une fierté de savoir que une dame de ma commune, à la personne de Madame Ata Kakayaki Sada, a été élue. C'est en même temps un défi pour nous.
Avec ce coup d'éclat, Madame Atta, présidente de la FENAPAB, élue pour 3 ans depuis le 23 septembre 2019, expose ici succinctement un plan de sa vision pour la filière cajou qui ne peut évidemment pas se réaliser sans le précieux concours des autorités en charge de l'agriculture au Bénin.
Actuellement, nous sommes à 130 000 tonnes. Mon souhait est qu'on fasse le double, sinon même pourquoi pas le triple du tonnage antérieur et ensuite qu'on puisse transformer plus de la moitié de ces produits au niveau local chez nous pour le plein essor de cette filière. Les activités à mener, c'est de continuer le plaidoyer envers le public, les privés, dans le renforcement des capacités.
Cashew is an increasingly important crop for the countries in West Africa. For Benin, it's their second most valuable export. And we saw this big potential to grow and increase more.
Le cajou arrive en seconde place après le coton. À 110 000, 120 000 tonnes, en 2 ans, nous sommes passés à 120, 130, 140 000 tonnes. L'objectif du gouvernement, c'est d'aller à 300 000 tonnes à la fin du quinquennat.
Cashew me permet de vivre. Au moment où je n'avais pas suivi avec Cashew Bénin, les 2 hectares font 5 sacs. Et maintenant, avec Cashew Bénin, je vends 15 sacs cette année. Le projet nous a appris beaucoup de choses.
Il a formé 10 personnes, dont 9 femmes et 1 homme.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes. Surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacards du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
Benin Cashew is an innovative program aimed at strengthening and growing the Beninese cashew sector. Its goal is to create a more productive, competitive, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth engine for the people of Benin. It's being funded by the USDA and is being implemented by TechnoServe and our partners at CRS. Over 8 years, Benin Cashew will increase the yields and incomes of more than 49,000 smallholder farmers, triple Benin's domestic processing capacity, create more than 3,400 jobs, most of which will be held by women, and will position the entire sector for continued growth long after the project ends.
Technicien travaille avec des hommes et des femmes pour bâtir des fermes et des entreprises compétitives qui contribuent à la réduction de la pauvreté, à l'augmentation de la résilience des bénéficiaires et de leur communauté. Nous restons convaincus que la participation pleine et entière des femmes et des filles permet de maximiser la croissance économique inclusive pour un développement généralisé. Au sein de la production agricole et notamment dans la filière cajou, bien que présentes, les femmes sont confrontées à des difficultés en ce qui concerne l'accès aux facteurs de production, notamment la terre, les ressources financières, la technologie et les formations. Au début du projet Bénin Cashew, la participation des femmes était d'environ 20,57%. À fin décembre 2020, ce taux est passé à 34,67% au sein de la production et à 39% au sein du projet. L'objectif étant d'atteindre au moins 40% de participation des femmes. Pour atteindre ce résultat, nous avons mis en place un dispositif institutionnel avec tous les partenaires du projet pour intégrer le genre au sein de toutes les activités de ce projet. Nous avons un dispositif basé sur des points focaux genre qui ont reçu des formations sur différentes techniques, différentes thématiques. Nous avons mené aussi un plaidoyer pour la modification des tests statutaires des fêtières, des producteurs de cajou afin d'alléger les conditions d'accès des femmes aux coopératives. Et nous avons pu avoir une femme présidente du conseil d'administration de la fêtière des producteurs d'anacarde et une femme présidente du conseil de surveillance de cette même organisation, ce qui est une première au Bénin au sein de la filière anacarde.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes. Surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
J'ai constaté qu'avec cette formation, la femme a un grand rôle à jouer pour l'émancipation et la prospérité, bien partagée qu'à l'intérieur, qu'à l'extérieur, au sein du foyer. Grâce à cette même formation, la population, mais la communauté a un regard craintif en nous. Ils nous copient, ils voient la manière dont nous vivons avec mon épouse. Grâce à cette formation, nous avons pu réaliser beaucoup de choses.
Cette formation que nous avons eue sur le champ nous a réveillés par rapport à la femme, parce que dans le maillon production, on a constaté que les femmes n'ont pas assez à la tête, donc du coup, elles sont marginalisées. Donc sur le terrain, nous voyons en ce que les femmes sont prises en compte. Et comme le projet le recommande 40% de femmes, il faut dire que ce n'est pas facile. 40% des femmes dans tout ce que nous faisons, on doit pouvoir toucher au moins 40% de femmes.
Africa. A continent thriving with opportunities. 70% of the world's cocoa, 53% of the world's cashew. The resource-rich continent is at a turning point. By 2030, Africa will be home to 20% of the world's population and 75% of people aged under 35. Yet, across the continent, some dynamics persist. The continent continues to export raw natural resources at low cost. Meanwhile, the resilience of its economies is tested by unemployment, poverty, and a global pandemic. Despite the challenges, together we can unlock this potential. At Arise IIP, our vision is to build an African industry. Our ambition is to shift Africa from a global commodity supplier to a global manufacturing powerhouse. We do this by identifying industrial gaps in African countries. We then design tailor-made infrastructure and solutions to enable the sustainable and local transformation of raw materials. In Gabon, where 85% of the land is covered by dense and pristine rainforest, we created from scratch a vibrant local timber industry. It did not happen overnight. We brought together local timber industry players and attracted foreign investors to create a competitive timber processing ecosystem. For this ecosystem to flourish, we attracted foreign investors, establishing linkages across the whole value chain. organizing trade shows for hosted companies to showcase and market their timber products, and boosting exports. GSE's Wood Cluster is now composed of 90 companies operating from the first to the third transformation of timber. All of them transforming ethically and sustainably sourced Gabonese wood. In less than 10 years, Gabon shifted from a net log exporter to the first exporter of veneer in Africa and second in the world. In fact, the real impact was much wider and more meaningful. With GSES, Arise IIP has created 16,000 jobs, attracted 120 investors coming from 18 different countries, operating in 19 industry sectors. In Togo, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire, our work is underway following the same approach. Cotton, cashew, soya, cocoa. We enable the transformation of local agricultural products with modern infrastructures and integrated logistics services. By investing in local manufacturing, we ultimately seek to replace foreign imports with domestic production. In all our endeavors, we are driven by the pursuit of green, sustainable growth, one that can last for generations to come. We are the pioneer of a green, responsible industrialization, one that ensures gender diversity, sustainability, traceability, and a zero-waste policy. This is why we create innovative solutions that support a climate-conscious economic development in Africa. This starts with neutralizing carbon emissions and creating a positive environmental legacy. By 2022, all of Arise IIP's industrial zones will be carbon neutral, powered fully by solar technology. This is all made possible by the dedication and commitment of the women and men who work at Arise. Together, we are on a journey to build an African industry, a journey to create a better, more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive future for everyone. Arise IIP, committed to making Africa thrive.
Le rôle du pépiniériste, nous sommes les gardiens du matériel végétal, qui est un patrimoine pour notre pays. Donc sans le pépiniériste, nos matériels végétaux performants vont disparaître. Ce que Benin Cashew a fait pour moi, permettez-moi de le dire, ils m'ont beaucoup appuyé, surtout la formation des femmes. Donc on a formé 10 personnes, dont 9 femmes et un homme. Benin Cashew est comme la levure dans la farine de blé qui fait lever le pain. J'ai pu avoir beaucoup de choses. Je me suis acheté un domaine où je suis en train de construire une maison familiale actuellement. Et à côté, j'ai prévu une pépinière. Avant Benin Cashew, je produis 5000 plants. Je suis aujourd'hui à au moins 12 000 plants. Je vois un futur radieux devant moi.
Africa. A continent thriving with opportunities. 70% of the world's cocoa, 53% of the world's cashew. The resource-rich continent is at a turning point. By 2030, Africa will be home to 20% of the world's population and 75% of people aged under 35. Yet, across the continent, some dynamics persist. The continent continues to export raw natural resources at low cost. Meanwhile, the resilience of its economies is tested by unemployment, poverty, and a global pandemic. Despite the challenges, together we can unlock this potential. At Arise IIP, our vision is to build an African industry. Our ambition is to shift Africa from a global commodity supplier to a global manufacturing powerhouse. We do this by identifying industrial gaps in African countries. We then design tailor-made infrastructure and solutions to enable the sustainable and local transformation of raw materials. In Gabon, where 85% of the land is covered by dense and pristine rainforest, we created from scratch a vibrant local timber industry. It did not happen overnight. We brought together local timber industry players and attracted foreign investors to create a competitive timber processing ecosystem. For this ecosystem to flourish, we attracted foreign investors, establishing linkages across the whole value chain, organizing trade shows for hosted companies to showcase and market their timber products, and boosting exports. GSE's Wood Cluster is now composed of 90 companies operating from the first to the third transformation of timber. All of them transforming ethically and sustainably sourced Gabonese wood. In less than 10 years, Gabon shifted from a net log exporter to the first exporter of veneer in Africa and second in the world. In fact, the real impact was much wider and more meaningful. With GSES, Arise IIP has created 16,000 jobs, attracted 120 investors coming from 18 different countries, operating in 19 industry sectors. In Togo, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire, our work is underway following the same approach. Cotton, cashew, soya, cocoa. We enable the transformation of local agricultural products with modern infrastructures and integrated logistics services. By investing in local manufacturing, we ultimately seek to replace foreign imports with domestic production. In all our endeavors, we are driven by the pursuit of green, sustainable growth, one that can last for generations to come. We are the pioneer of a green, responsible industrialization, one that ensures gender diversity, sustainability, traceability, and a zero-waste policy. This is why we create innovative solutions that support a climate-conscious economic development in Africa. This starts with neutralizing carbon emissions and creating a positive environmental legacy. By 2022, all of Arise IIP's industrial zones will be carbon neutral, powered fully by solar technology. This is all made possible by the dedication and commitment of the women and men who work at Arise. Together, we are on a journey to build an African industry, a journey to create a better, more resilient, sustainable future for everyone. Arise IIP, committed to making Africa thrive.
Dans ce contexte actuel de crise sanitaire mondiale liée à la pandémie de la COVID-19, il s'avère fondamental de relever la participation des femmes dans tous les maillons de la production, d'encourager et de renforcer leur leadership et leur résilience pour favoriser leur autonomisation, surtout dans le domaine économique. TechnoServe Bénin et l'Agence territoriale de développement agricole Pôle 4 s'inscrivent activement dans cette dynamique. À cet effet, le 15 et 16 octobre 2020, s'est tenue dans la salle de conférence de l'ATDA Pôle 4 à Parakou une cérémonie de célébration de la Journée internationale de la femme rurale édition 2020. Cette journée a pour objectif de définir les modalités de mise en œuvre d'une stratégie de renforcement du leadership et d'une résilience plus accrue des femmes dans les différentes activités de développement socio-économique.
Dans la plupart des décisions, ces femmes-là ne bénéficient pas des avantages qui sont liés au développement économique de chaque pays. Donc, pour les valoriser davantage, la communauté internationale a dédié la journée du 15 octobre pour les célébrer. Comme nous sommes en partenariat avec des projets, programmes, ils ont décidé de nous accompagner pour pouvoir célébrer l'événement au niveau local. Ces femmes-là sont aussi présentes surtout au niveau du maillon transformation. C'est pourquoi nous leur avons demandé de ne pas venir seulement pour écouter les discours, mais qu'elles viennent avec leur chef-d'œuvre pour qu'on puisse voir ce qu'elles font et les gens vont aussi profiter pour se ravitailler.
En effet, dans sa stratégie de renforcement des capacités des acteurs de la filière cajou, TechnoServe, à travers Bénin Cajou, fournit des assistances techniques spécifiques et appropriées à la satisfaction des besoins des partenaires du public et du privé afin de promouvoir la production des noix brutes d'anacarde, le développement des chaînes de valeur et l'amélioration des revenus, notamment ceux des femmes.
Les braves femmes rurales sont effectivement à l'honneur aujourd'hui. Nous les félicitons et nous les exhortons à mettre leur résilience au service de nos communautés, surtout en cette période de pandémie. Et nous voulons les rassurer du soutien de TechnoServe pour une plus grande intégration du genre dans les chaînes de valeur de la filière anacarde.
Rappelons qu'au cours de cette messe agricole et rurale de haute facture, diverses autorités ont accompagné la TDA et TechnoServe à accélérer les meilleures innovations des produits dérivés du cajou et renforcer les aptitudes des femmes leaders et résilientes dans la filière cajou. Aussi faut-il le souligner, l'ambiance a été motivante et festive, marquée par 2 temps forts, portant notamment sur les réflexions et les partages d'expériences sur la résilience des femmes dans la chaîne de valeur anacarde et l'exposition vente des meilleures innovations réussies en faveur des femmes dans le développement socio-économique.
C'est grâce à Bénin Cajou que ça a été organisé dans le Nord, précisément à Parakou. Et ça a permis aux femmes des 2 Nord de participer. Je veux dire à Takora, Donga, Borgo, Algori, Zoukoline, du centre aussi. Voilà pourquoi je tiens à remercier très sincèrement Bénin Cajou. Et cette séance aujourd'hui nous a permis de partager les expériences des autres femmes. C'est déjà un plus pour nous. Et pour nous qui sommes arrivés, je nous demande à notre retour de passer l'information à celles qui ne sont pas venues pour qu'elles puissent aussi être informées de ce que nous sommes venus faire. C'est ce qui manque souvent. Et ça fait que les informations, nous les gardons et les autres n'ont plus d'informations aussi. Ça ne permet pas un développement du groupe. Donc je nous demande de souvent communiquer, de partager l'information avec les autres femmes aussi de nos groupes.
Notons que dans la vision de travailler pour une véritable accélération et intégration de la filière cajou au Bénin, avec une part conséquente pour les femmes, l'intégration du genre constitue l'un des principaux axes d'intervention de TechnoServe via le projet Bénin Cajou.
Le projet Bénin Cajou a inscrit dans ses priorités, à compter de l'année 2019, des activités pour la sensibilisation des acteurs en vue d'une meilleure prise en compte de l'intégration du genre dans les différents maillons de la production. C'est à ce titre qu'après avoir milité en amont par un plaidoyer auprès de la FENAPAB pour l'amendement des textes en faveur d'une plus grande intégration du genre, Béné Cashew a soutenu en aval le processus de renouvellement des organes de gestion de la FENAPAB, qui s'est achevé le 23 septembre 2019 avec l'élection à sa tête d'une femme, Madame Saadatou Atta Kakayachi, en tant que présidente du conseil d'administration.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes. Surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacards du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
Mariée et mère de 3 enfants, Madame Saadatou est propriétaire de 5 plantations d'anacardiers de 7 hectares et demi à Pénésoulou dans la commune de Bassila, à 372 km de Cotonou. Entrée dans la production du cajou depuis 1998 et précédemment chef quartier, cette mère dévouée gère en subsidiaire son restaurant, son commerce de savon et mène des œuvres sociales en faveur des orphelins de son arrondissement. Brave et vaillante, elle exhorte son équipe et les femmes dans la filière cajou à se battre pour pousser loin la filière.
Pour réussir ma mission, c'est un engagement efficace de l'équipe. Ensuite aussi, il y a la disponibilité que toutes les femmes adhèrent aux coopératives de leur localité, entretenir bien les champs disponibles, celles qui n'en ont pas encore n'ont qu'à produire et surtout faire la vente groupée.
Le directeur général de la Fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacardes du Bénin, FENAPAB, explique ici les raisons qui ont soutenu cette action d'éclat manifestée par l'élection d'une femme à la présidence du conseil d'administration de la FENAPAB.
Depuis la création de la FENAPAB en 2006, elle a été gérée par les hommes. Déjà en septembre 2019, les hommes et les femmes ont souhaité mettre maintenant les femmes à la tête de cette organe pour gérer ces 2 organes-là, conseil d'administration et conseil de surveillance.
La commune de Bassila n'est pas restée en marge de ce processus car la mairie s'est illustrée récemment dans des actes forts en faveur des femmes pour la filière cajou.
Il faut dire que c'est un honneur pour nous et une fierté de savoir que une dame de ma commune, à la personne de Madame Atta Kakayachi Sada, a été élue. C'est en même temps un défi pour nous.
Avec ce coup d'éclat, Madame Atta, présidente de la FENAPAB, élue pour 3 ans depuis le 23 septembre 2019, expose ici succinctement un plan de sa vision pour la filière cajou qui ne peut évidemment pas se réaliser sans le précieux concours des autorités en charge de l'agriculture au Bénin.
Actuellement, nous sommes à 130 000 tonnes. Mon souhait est qu'on fasse le double, sinon même pourquoi pas le triple du tonnage antérieur et ensuite qu'on puisse transformer plus de la moitié de ces produits au niveau local chez nous pour le plein essor de cette filière. Les activités à mener, c'est de continuer le plaidoyer envers le public, les privés, dans le renforcement des capacités.
Cashew is an increasingly important crop for the countries in West Africa. For Benin, it's their second most valuable export. And we saw this grow and increase.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes. Surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacards du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
Benin Cashew is an innovative program aimed at strengthening and growing the Beninese cashew sector. Its goal is to create a more productive, competitive, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth engine for the people of Benin. It's being funded by the USDA and is being implemented by TechnoServe and our partners at CRS. Over 8 years, Benin Cashew will increase be held by women and will position the entire sector for continued growth long after the project ends.
Technoserve travaille avec des hommes et des femmes pour bâtir des fermes et des entreprises résilientes des bénéficiaires et de leur communauté. Nous restons convaincus que la participation pleine et entière des femmes et des filles permet de maximiser la croissance économique inclusive pour un développement généralisé. Au sein de la production agricole et notamment dans la filière cajou, bien que présentes, les femmes sont confrontées à des difficultés en ce qui concerne l'accès aux facteurs de production, notamment la terre, les ressources financières, la technologie et les formations. Au début du projet Benin Cashew, la participation des femmes était d'environ 20,57%. À fin décembre 2020, et à 39% au sein du projet. L'objectif étant d'atteindre au moins la participation des femmes. Pour atteindre ce résultat, nous avons mis en place un dispositif institutionnel avec tous les partenaires du projet pour intégrer le genre au sein de toutes les activités de ce projet. Nous avons un dispositif basé sur des points focaux genre qui ont reçu
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of the ACU Global Market Encounter with Jim Fitzpatrick. On behalf of the African Cashew Alliance, we would like to appreciate our partners and sponsors who have made it possible for us to bring this session to you once again. We appreciate the GIZ Move, Intersnacks, SNI, CNFA Pro Cashew, just to mention a few. Please note that this session is being held in English, but there's a French simultaneous interpretation. To access this service, kindly locate the globe icon on your screen, select a preferred language, and mute the original sound. Without taking much time, Jim to take us through today's session. Thank you. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Blessing, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Jim. Hope you too.
I'm not in bad shape at all. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Good to be with you again. Believe it or not, this is the 49th session of the GME, as it's called. Today, we're going to talk about the market. We're going to talk about the so-called African cashew processing revolution, as I've taken to calling it. And we're going to talk to a processor. So we have really three segments to today: markets, processing. I'm going to talk a little bit about African processing, and a new processor's experience. So we're going to talk to Coastal Nuts from Mtwara, Tanzania, a new processor making a great product. And we're going to getting into cashew processing, the experience, the challenges, and the progress so far. And at the end, there's plenty of time. It's up to you if you want to ask some questions, if you want to make some comments. Use the facility, the Q&A facility, to type in your questions. Or if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, come online and ask your question in person. So let's get started. Let's have a look at the markets. I'm just going to update what we've been seeing over the past few weeks. It's not been a particularly eventful period. prices have moved up a little bit. So I just thought it might be a time to take a look at the general trend in pricing. As you can see here, we've got line chart, US dollars per pound, FOB, high-level Vietnamese processors, because that's effectively where the volume market is. And I'm talking about 3 to 6 months forward positions. So we need to be very clear, and a little bit more about that on cashew prices later. The market, if we look at the 240s and 320s, it has picked up a little bit over the last 2 to 3 weeks, really. The general trend remains the same. There's nothing broken. Let's try and place these prices in the trend of recent years. So we're still below the average price. It's interesting, 240s are below the average price for 320s over the past 2 years. Not surprising that there is a little bit of buying interest in 240s right now. We're way above the highs, as you can imagine, and we're just above the lows. So if you look at the market, we're about midway between the lows and the average price of the last 2 years. And that has picked up a little bit in the last 2 weeks on more buying interest, on a little bit of forward buying. And the market is seemingly slowly coming back to life on cashew kernels, especially whole grades right now. Let's have a look a little bit more closely. So we're about 6% over the low and about 7% below the average. So right in that middle period. Are cashew kernels cheap compared to historical prices? Yes, they certainly are. We are seeing other features. We're seeing the differentials between the grades compressed, particularly whole grades. That is often something that's noticed. I was having a look over the years, as I do. I did a lot of traveling last week, and when you're on a plane, you've not much to do, so I look at cashew price histories. And if you look back over certain periods, now often in June and October, as you can see, when the grades get compressed together, it's often a signal of some movement in price. It doesn't necessarily mean up or down, it means movement. And we've seen that in the past. And it's often been the indicator of very strong movement too. So something to keep an eye on. Second factor we're noticing right now is that the differences across the range of pricing, and everyone knows by now that there is a wide range of prices on cashews, that you can buy what appears to be the same product for 10 different prices on any given day for all different kinds of parameters. The difference between the prices between processors, the top and the bottom end of the processors, especially in Vietnam, is quite wide. That too sometimes can be a signal of movement on price. Sometimes it's a signal that price is about to move up. When it goes the other way, it can be a signal that price is about to go down. Now, that's the history. And we can't always be sure that what's happened in the past will repeat in the future. But these are indications, more things to look at than things to be absolutely certain. The market signals, well, we are definitely seeing more buying of kernels. Prices have moved up a little. I would say that, in my opinion, forward cover is lower than it would normally be for this time of year. That's not surprising, given, for example, if we look at the US market, where every month in the second half of last year was well down in terms of imports on the previous year. In fact, it was a remarkably low period. So it's not surprising that buyers might be in a little bit of shock. They're also been looking at economic conditions, and they may well be saying, let's hold fire, let's see how the new crop comes in, and then we start to make some moves. So around about now, they're starting to get news on the new crop. I'm talking mostly about buyers in Western countries. They're getting news on the new crop. There's nothing really in it to cause them to wait too much longer. So I guess they're starting to look at prices. We're also seeing the inventories in destinations, spot markets dropping. Again, if you have long period of reduced imports, especially in the US, you're bound to see the stocks reduced a little bit over that period. We're also seeing, and I think this is maybe a particularly indicative signal for Vietnamese processors, but we're seeing the prices of byproducts falling back again. Now, if 2023 were to be a year where energy prices were to head back, and we are seeing that, we're seeing it in Europe on gas, not for consumers, unfortunately, but we are seeing lower prices in wholesale energy markets. That would mean that CNSL shell cake values would probably slip back. That changes the economics for Vietnamese processors particularly, and would cause them perhaps to mark their prices up or possibly to reduce the volume they're producing. Either way, these are four things that we need to look at in the coming weeks, and particularly as we get toward the end of April, I think. I wanted to have a look at cashew kernel prices. As I was saying, there's lots of different, what we used to call parities. So lots of different prices for slightly different products. All of these are 320s. So in Vietnam, you have cashews for China, you have the lower end quality, you have a Vietnamese BRC quality, I'm going to call it for want of a better word. You have a top Vietnamese quality, up to AFI specs. You have Indian quality, African, Brazilian, and organic cashews. And if we look at the prices, so again, we've got US dollars per pound FOB. Right now, this week, these are the prices that we see. And what we're seeing is that there is a difference depending on what you're buying. Now, some buyers will be aware of this, others won't. Some processors will fall into the trap of thinking that they have to match the low. So, for example, we see the low-end prices in Vietnam around the 255, 260 mark, compared to Indian export prices, $3 plus. So an Indian processor selling into a market in Japan, a market in the Middle East, or a top quality market in the US would expect to be making $3 plus. Whereas a Vietnamese processor selling prompt, probably lower quality material, is looking 255 to 260. Now, this range of prices is really important to understand if you're an African processor. In fact, if you're anyone, but if you're an African processor particularly, because it's too easy to be pulled into this discussion where your product, usually a superior product, is compared to the lower end of the market. So if we take, let's say, the bottom end of the Vietnamese price and the mid-range BRC, that is equating to the lower end of trade in Africa. Now, some people in African countries are selling their kernels at the same price as the bottom end of Vietnam. I don't really understand why, but they're doing it. Others are making prices in the range $2.80, $2.85. If we compare on quality, so for example, I was in Benin last week. I was working with Benin Cashew. I was talking to farmers, processors, traders. We had a really good week. And when we looked at it, and we looked at the quality of the product, I saw product from Fludor, I saw product from Africa, like for like on quality. Now, for processors, marketing is about convincing your customer that your product deserves a price in this range because you're offering a quality that is comparable in this range. If your customer is telling you that you're 30, 40 cents higher than he can buy, he's probably buying something at this end of the market, lower quality Vietnamese. So we're not always comparing like for like. Now, it may well be that you still have to take a lower price. It may well be that you make the premium price, and there are plenty to take a lower price. It may well be that you make the premium price, and there are plenty of examples of processors making premium prices right now, last week, this week, based on quality, based on traceability. But it's really important for processors and the organizations that support them in African countries to understand how the structure of the market is. Someone said to me last week, well, it doesn't matter what we do if the price in Vietnam is low. Well, I beg to differ. It does matter, and there's evidence that it does. So keep an eye on where your product is in this range. What is it influenced by? Well, you can see it's influenced by quality, Sometimes it's influenced by the destination market. It's influenced by food safety systems. And of course, if you're lucky enough to have certified supply chains, it's influenced by that too. Let's have a look at RCN prices and the RCN market. So we see prices actually on RCN are relatively similar to previous years. Unlike kernels, which are trading below the averages, raw cashew nuts are in or around the averages. Early offers, as often happens, were high. Prices have dropped back now. That's not unusual. We see it this year. We saw it last year. We see it back over the years. Starts high, drops back a little bit as the crop gets going. Vietnamese buyers right now are focused on Cambodia, and they're right to be. Imports in Vietnam are very strong. More about that in a minute. Indian old crop stocks have been reduced. They've been used, in other words. Trade from Ghana is brisk, and that's trade based on Ghanaian production, but also on Ivorian production coming across the border, informally, unfortunately. And of particular interest, I think, to Indian buyers is that Benin will be out of the market until May. So the government has introduced a system to allow processors access to raw cashew nuts until May. This is part of the transitional measures until the export of raw cashew nuts is eventually completely banned. So raw cashew nuts, a little bit weaker, coming back a little bit into line with kernels, maybe still some way to go on that. Let's have a look at what that's done to trading margins. So I did this slightly differently this time. You will have seen a chart where I compare costs and prices. But this time I, using basically the same figures, but current market values, I had a look at gross margins. Now these are gross margins on kernels. And what you can see right now is that Vietnamese processors, this is based on the current kernels market, based on current RCN prices, and Vietnamese own processors' estimates of their cost of processing. We see that margins really are below sustainable levels. They are, some of them, probably losing money. Others are making very small margins. And it's not much different in the Indian domestic market just now, simply because early in the season, raw cashew nut prices are quite high. And perhaps the Indian market is in a little bit of a lull at the moment too. If we look at the margins for imported nuts into India, based on the current prices, Ghana works. And I just did a quick calculation for an efficient Ivorian processor to see, could they make a profit margin in the current situation? And they could. But let's be clear, not all processors have a low enough cost of processing yet. Many are new and they're developing their systems. Not all processors are processing to capacity, which also is going to impact their ability to make a margin. So as we look at it, we're seeing margins still under pressure in Vietnam and to a certain extent in India too. Margins are always under pressure in African countries, but good processors are making money at the moment if they're doing it right. I mentioned again the byproduct prices putting pressure on margins. Overall, it's not a particularly brilliant time to be a processor, but that has to change. Obviously, either the raw material comes to levels that work, or the kernels move to levels that support the current RCN prices. What we've seen in the last 2 weeks is a little bit of both. RCN has drifted back substantially since the beginning of the season. Cashew kernels have picked up in price a little. Now, if you're in one of those premium markets that we talked about a minute ago, you're probably doing okay. But if you're trying to compete with the lowest end price in the market, the low end of Vietnamese WW320s, it's going to be a real struggle. So positioning in the market is really important for processors, especially if you're one of those processors like the people I met last week producing really top quality product, or like our guest today, Coastal Nuts from Tanzania. Let's have a look at some of the trade figures. So I looked at Vietnamese imports, and strangely, imports really contradict the talk in the market that RCN is too high, we don't need it, kernels prices are too low. And what we're seeing is very strong import volumes into Vietnam, remarkably 68% up on the same period last year, and a new record for 1st of January to the 15th of March, which is the latest numbers I have. And if we see, it's not just Cambodia. Now, the Cambodian crop is coming early, and it is coming well. And imports by the 15th of March into Vietnam were almost double the previous year. But also we see more Vietnamese buying of Tanzanian product and an increase in Nigerian. Now, that could be, of course, given that that product arrived Jan, Feb, March, that product is old crop Nigerian, old crop Ivorian. So the plus 191 from Nigeria is not hugely significant in that the actual volume is quite low at this time of year from Nigeria. So again, if we look for market signals in this, I think what we're seeing is the impact of a lower carry-in, a poor national crop in Vietnam, the early Cambodian crop, and I think probably Vietnamese processors expecting strong competition from India, following India's remarkably high import of raw cashew nuts last year, which is forecast to continue. Speaking of India, looking at RCN imports, I've just got January and February figures. Again, we see strong start on imports into India. People tell me that the carry-out stock from 2022 is quite low, and what remains is of relatively low quality. So the market is well positioned to import more RCN this year. There is strong demand in India in the beginning of the year, but it appears to have cooled a little in the last few weeks. West African arrivals will be seen from April. And again, to mention, Benin shipments will not come until May, which means that we're not going to see Benin cashews in India until sometime in early July, at the earliest. Now, that is going to impact other quality suppliers. It might impact Ghana. We might see Indian buyers looking a little bit more for the better quality material from Côte d'Ivoire, and that will have an impact there. On a more broader level in India, we had a look at some news reports. So this service, the Credit Rating Information Service of India, makes some forecasts, reputable body, and they're talking about strong processor development and strong revenue growth in 2023 and beyond. Strong growth in demand, again, I doubt it would be as strong as last year, but nonetheless, strong growth in demand. But they also show operating margins at only 7%. Now that's thin. And that means that there is not much room to go chasing high-priced RCN. It means there's not much room for volatility in the price of raw material. Keep an eye also on the rupee, and it may gain, according to forecasts, it may start to gain a little bit against the US dollar, which will impact RCN values on import. Bearing in mind, India imports raw cashew nuts, and the vast bulk of that is sold in the domestic market. So it's bought in dollars, sold in Indian rupees. We'll have a look at demand, looking at Vietnam's kernel exports, pretty strong first quarter. In fact, the February and first half March figures are way over last year. We see, in fact, the second highest first 10 weeks, the highest was in 2021, but the second highest first 10 weeks of a year ever. Very weak January, but there's been a strong February and a strong first half of March. Now, part of that is technical. Part of it is a little bit technical, but part of it is a signal that demand is coming on a little bit. This will be encouraging for Vietnamese processors, particularly as they've imported so much more this year than they have previously. let's have a look at some of the destination markets. So the three main import markets, you might add the Middle East in there, around about 60,000 tons. But let's have a look at the three markets. So North America, last year we saw very badly hit by a lot of things. Overbuying in 21, inflation, economic shocks, higher interest rates, imports down by 19%. Western Europe, much less severely impacted, down by 3%. We've been seeing strong growth in Western Europe for the past decade, so a little retracement doesn't really make a difference. Whereas in the US, we've only been seeing quite slow growth over the past 10 years, 2021 being the exception. So 19% down is really significant. China was down by about 11%, which is surprisingly good performance given the disruption last year due to COVID lockdowns and all kinds of other disruptions. Looking in the US, very poor second half of 2022. This has continued into January. January 2022 was quite a good month, but 2023 is down 14%. Not quite surprisingly. If we look at the Vietnamese shipments to add to the imports, we see, again, significantly down 26% on last year. Last year was very high for the early part of the season. So perhaps better to judge it against 2021. And it's down 14% on 2021. So based on those figures, we're not seeing much turn in the US market in terms of actual shipments at this stage, although we are seeing a little bit more interest in forward buying. Looking at Europe, following a very poor December, down 23%. December was a very poor year, given that the overall year figure was down something like 3.3%. December was heavily down. January to March, shipments from Vietnam, again, the Netherlands, the main import destination, and Germany, the largest market, both significantly down. So again, in Europe, so far, not much physical sign of an improvement, but bear in mind, both of these markets buy forward. So the contracts that were delivered and shipped in January and February were probably bought 3-6 months ago. And that the contracts that start now will probably indicate changes when those changes occur. My guess is that's probably sometime in early May. Looking at China, looking at the Middle East first, we see strong shipments from Vietnam in the early part of the year. Now, that is not just indicative of Vietnam taking market share, that's also indicative of improved demand. And if you were at the World Cashew Convention recently, you will have talked to buyers and found that they are quite optimistic on demand in the coming 9 months or so. Looking at China, again, much improved on 2022, but still way behind 2021. In 2021, China imported, in this period, about 9,000 tons. Last year, that was down to something like 3,000, and now we're looking at an improvement, again, as the restrictions are limited. So in none of those markets are we seeing, in terms of shipments, any signal that there's a major shift. The most optimistic is in the Middle East market, but we're still waiting for shipments to show improvement in Western markets. We are getting the signals of more forward buying, but we're not getting the signals of shipments just yet. That's going to take some time. So we need to make sure what we're looking at, which parameters we're judging the market on. This is one of the reasons why smaller processors who always want to sell prompt or spot shipment will always struggle. Because when the market's like this, nobody's in need of prompt and spot shipments. But if you're selling forward, it might be a different story. Continuing on our global perspective, let's have a look at any updates on production. And I'm just going to hit on some of the major talking points. Looks like the crop in Vietnam is as poor as we thought. We spoke about that 3 weeks ago. Cambodia, crop looks good. It's nowhere near as big as 2021, but it's a much better crop than 22, according to all reports. There's a new policy in the country now, and they are going to, according to the government, they're going to support the development of production, but they're also going to look to process 25% of their crop, which would mean something in the region of 200,000 tons of processing by 2027 and 50% of the crop by 2030. Ambitious, but given how Cambodia has performed on production and the speed of the growth, I wouldn't rule out that Cambodia will be successful in that area. And there are already a number of projects in place. There are a number of factories in place and a number of new projects also in place. Looking at India, nothing really changed over the last 3 weeks. Still a good crop forecast. The number I hear is 750,000 tons. Mixed weather reports, but that's to be expected. Indian cashews are produced over a vast area where you will get varying conditions. And we really won't know until May what the reality of that situation is. West Africa, Côte d'Ivoire, the world's largest grower of cashews. Official forecast still is over 1 million tons, but the first flush, their first crop, if you like, has been poor in quality and to a certain extent quantity due to the weather conditions. Early in the season, we saw a spike in farm gate prices, but they seem to have settled back now in or around the minimum farm gate price of the CCR. It will need to be watched closely. Weather conditions can change, particularly the impact of rain in a country that's a huge producer, but has still a relatively weak post-harvest infrastructure. Looking at Ghana, I see the crop is improving every year. I get a real wide variety of estimates of the crop. Some people in business reckon it's about 85,000 tons. I've estimates all the way up to 140,000 tons. Personally, I'm erring toward the higher end of that range rather than the lower end at this stage. Lots of cross-border activity, illegal from Burkina, from Mali and so on. Illegal from Côte d'Ivoire, at least from the Ivorian side, it's illegal. And the initial farm gate price, and farm gate prices spiked up. That was pretty predictable, given Benin was not going to be in the export market for RCN early in the year. But that seems to have eased back a bit. Maybe it's a flow of product coming in from Côte d'Ivoire. If we look up Benin, I have to mention Benin. I was there last week. Still good forecast on the crop. Again, a wide range of figures depending on who you talk to. The main feature right now is no export until May for raw cashew nuts. I should also mention, as an aside, that processing in Benin is really on the way now. Factories are upping their capacity, existing factories, and they're producing good products. The new zone, the GDIZ, has also got an operational factory, and that factory will be added to in the coming years. News from the Senegambia region is that the crop is coming along nicely, slightly interfered with by some carryover stocks. There are carryover stocks in Senegal, relatively small in terms of the big picture, but by Senegalese standards quite large. And in Guinea-Bissau, it looks as if the carryover stock that we spoke about last time has partly been sold, but there does remain a significant stock still available, which is probably good news, to be honest. If it's been stored well, it's probably good quality material and available for processing. And the last country I'll mention is Nigeria. Again, an improved crop, but no real change on our discussion 3 weeks ago and 5 weeks ago indeed. So what does that mean for the big picture on production? The crop, I think, is going to be a little bit bigger this year, not as big as some people think, to my mind. We're seeing an increase in Cambodia, lower in Vietnam, lower Southern Hemisphere crops. So I include the end of 2022 crops, running a crop year, October to September. So we have balancing factors. The way you look at this production now is highly concentrated. 60% is in 3 countries, Cambodia, India, Cote d'Ivoire. One of those countries, India, consumes all of its own cashews. So if we had in any given year, if we had a crop problem in either Cambodia or Cote d'Ivoire, we would have a significant shortage. And of course, if we had very large crops in those countries and others, we could have a surplus. The market could easily tip into surplus. If we look at the trend overall, we saw most of the last decade, the growth in production, which was significant growth, driven by West Africa. So you can see on this chart, the green bars, West Africa rising steadily, not a great deal of improvement elsewhere. And West Africa was driven by a whole range of countries, but Cote d'Ivoire was, of course, the star amongst those. Then we saw a period of much slower growth, where West African growth slowed down. Crops were okay, just there was no additional production coming online. And then we saw this spike driven by Cambodia. So this period here is purely driven by higher production in Cambodia. But that too has flattened a little bit. And so we're looking at this now, and at this period of slow growth in demand, relatively thin demand, we might start to think about surpluses. But we should also ask the question that if demand started to grow, as it's growing in India, elsewhere again, if it returned to the levels of the last decade, which I feel is highly likely, where would the next boom in production come from? It's not going to happen in Cambodia again. It's not going to happen in India or Vietnam. So we're still looking to West Africa to supply additional raw cashew nuts into the next decade. So let's have a quick overview then of the situation. Production, crop looks good. I'm thinking about 4.5 million tons. Need to watch the weather, especially in India and West Africa, especially Cote d'Ivoire. Raw cashew nut market, I feel there's not much room for price rises, if any. That I would expect further falls, but not too far, as Indian demand is likely to shore up prices in the coming months. Processors, not much consolation, but that kernels RCN gap is beginning to close. Margins remain not sustainable in the long run, and that means either less processing as people stop processing or cut their capacity in order not to lose money, especially in Vietnam, or higher kernels prices to support better margins. Demand, North America, looks like still very slow to come back to market, very price oriented. So don't expect too many American buyers to be looking for premium cashews. They're going to be looking for cheap cashews. In Europe, definitely kernel stocks are falling. Forward cover is relatively low, which is surprising given that we're at close to the bottom of the market, 6% off the 2-year lows. And look for continued buying, nothing too dramatic, but buyers will continue to be in the market, I feel, over the next few weeks, maybe a little pause over the Easter holiday period in Europe, and then back to business. India, forecasts remain positive. It may be a little bit slow at the moment, according to some reports, but the overall forecasts for the year remain quite positive. Don't forget, Indian demand, as far as the international market is concerned, is shown through buying of raw cashew nuts, not through buying of kernels. And look for a strengthening of the Indian rupee against the dollar, which will make RCN look better value. African processors, I'm going to talk about this in a minute. I expect European demand to rise based on all of these factors, quality, traceability, more about that to follow. This year, costs. Listening to economic forecasts just this morning, inflation is definitely falling. We know that freight costs and energy costs have fallen and are predicted to fall further. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, it looks, according to the economists, that 2023 will see an easing of these costs. I mean, there are a lot of variables in play, And if they are, we would expect then to see some measure of confidence return to the market. So I think still the real question that we're looking at here is, when will demand in Western countries react to low prices? And depending on when that is, it will determine whether we see higher prices as the year goes on, or whether we'll see relatively flat prices. To my mind, very little room for price declines or significant price declines in the market at the moment. So that's an overview of the market. Let's get on to our second subject, and I'm glad to see that James Mulhall of Coastal Nuts is with us as a panelist. So I'm going to talk through some factors on processing, and then we'll have a chat with James on his experience in the cashew business. So the African cashew processing revolution, is it a revolution? What are we seeing? Well, we're certainly seeing, looking at processed volume across the continent and looking at the percentage of the crops. These are two of the important measures of development in processing, I think. We're seeing a strong trend in processing. This is up to 2021 because those are the numbers that we have confirmed. The provisional number for 2022 is higher again, heading up here toward the 250,000 tonne mark. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if in 2023, all things going well, that we see somewhere between 300 and 350,000 tonnes processed. Why I think that, I'll come to in a minute. It's not been even by any means. We see processing in East Africa has been under pressure, although there are signs of a resurgence there. Most of the new development has been in West Africa. And that we know, a whole range of factors, but we see Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, all developing their processing relatively quickly. So growth is uneven, but it is growing. There is still the issue of factories that are not utilizing their capacity, which severely impacts their profitability and severely impacts supply and opportunity too. What are the factors that made this revolution possible? First of all, I think we have to look at technology. The availability of technology from a number of countries, but particularly the entry, first of all, of Vietnamese technology, which was based on earlier technology developed in Italy and elsewhere, and recently the arrival of improved Indian and Chinese technology into the market. Secondly, increases in production volume in West Africa. And thirdly, we shouldn't forget the impact of buyers' needs. So buyers have been looking for alternatives. European buyers, 76% of their kernels came from Vietnam, processed in Vietnam in 2022. For Americans, that was 89%. Huge dependence on one processing country for their supplies. Those three factors, better market information, better market understanding, I think has been key factors. Support from NGOs and supports from government. One only has to look in Cote d'Ivoire for an example of government support for processing, but also elsewhere. And if you look at for NGO support, organizations, the USDA, GIZ, a whole range of projects over the years supporting not only production, but also processing. And they're even getting a little bit into marketing these days, which is quite good. But I think also the development of corporates over the last 10 years into the cashew business. If you look in Nigeria, if you look in Cote d'Ivoire, you see that corporates, multinationals, maybe small multinationals, but nonetheless multinationals, businesses from other sectors entering the market to complement what in the past was mainly traders as entrepreneurs in processing. So the nature of that has changed. So corporates would be food companies, ingredients companies, commodity companies, but also social impact investors, which have created really good examples of how to do business. And we're seeing that. So all of these factors, and I put in red the two that I think are probably the key factors that make it different this time, because this is not the first time that processing in African countries has developed. Going back to the 1970s, we saw significant processing. But the advent of technology has made entry easier, more predictable, and lower cost, in the sense that your product can get to market quicker because your process can get to capacity quicker. So we see a whole range of factors impacting the development of processing. And to my mind, there's enough in those factors to suggest that this will be a sustained change and a sustained development. Let's have a look at some results of African cashew kernels. Firstly, in Europe, which has been the most notable destination for African cashew kernels. And we see that the volumes, this is tons imported into the European Union since 2010. So you can see quite a significant increase. And if we look at market share, so this is EU market share for 2022, African kernels imports 21,670. This is basic raw natural kernels we're talking about here. What we see is a number of interesting factors. First of all, the rate of growth in African imports is double the overall EU market growth rate. That means that African kernels are taking market share from other origins. The market share has actually quadrupled since 2010. Last year it was 14.3%. So in 2021, African kernels' share of the EU market hit double figures for the first time probably since the 1970s. And in 2022, it moved on again. Factors such as sustainability, traceability, impact being part of the story are all really important for some European buyers. Downside perhaps is in Europe, we use fewer broken cashews. Really interesting fact, I think. In 2022, African processors supplied more cashew kernels to the European Union than India, Brazil, and Indonesia combined. And that is certainly a revolution. Let's have a look at how African kernels have fared in the US. So I've plotted the US imports on the same scale. That's why the scale is so high. That's the same scale as Europe. Now, so Europe in 2022 was over 21,000 tons. And the US is here just around the 10,000 ton mark. Again, we see growth, but rather erratic growth. We see after a high price period in 2017, Africa's share dipped, then it increased again. If we look at market share, much lower. In Europe, it's 14.3%. In the United States, it's about 7%. About 10,300 tons or so imported. The growth rate is strong, 6.5% over the 5 years, compound annual growth rate. Africa's share grew significantly in 2022. So it grew, you can see that, the growth. Now the market contracted, as we know, but the African share did not. It actually grew by 51%, and the market share, as I say, around about the 7% mark, which shows a certain amount of resilience in the relationship between the processors and American buyers. Price is the key factor in the US market, especially now. Factors such as traceability and quality are less important. That quality is less important is surprising, but it seems to be a fact. Price is the major factor for American buyers, and that actually bears out findings in some surveys we did for Cashew 3-4 years ago, when we had a look at the reaction of buyers in the US and in Europe, and it bears out their concerns on price. Côte d'Ivoire is the success story in the United States, probably primarily driven by Olam. Côte d'Ivoire supplied 67% of the total African supply to the US in 2022. And exports have grown by an annual growth rate, a compound annual growth rate of 29% since 2017. So that's a really strong performance. On the other hand, unfortunately, Mozambique, which has been a strong supplier to the United States for many, many years, but essentially since 2015, Mozambique's exports to the US have collapsed. I think probably more for factors within the industry in Mozambique rather than factors within the US market. Nonetheless, in both cases, in Europe and the United States, which would be the key target markets for African processors, especially West African processors, we see significant moves forward. It still needs to grow. There's still a long way to go, but the signs are quite positive, particularly bearing in mind that 2022 was such a poor year for demand. Big challenges remain. Challenges in costs, challenges in management, and challenges in marketing. Still huge challenges for African processors. And all of these things are evident wherever you go and talk to people about processing, talk to them about investment. These are the factors that come up. How to compete with lower cost processing in Asia, even though Asian buyers have huge costs of moving their raw material to their processing plants. It's still tough to compete with them. Any new industry will have challenges of management, finding the right managers, training them, finding the right technology, food safety management, quality management systems, and eventually integrating all of those things into the supply chain, including marketing. And as I was saying to colleagues last week, marketing has to be a full supply chain activity. It has to be integrated into the business in order to be successful, especially when you look at what buyers are needing. Food safety, traceability, quality, all of those things are things that start right back at the farm gate. So let's have a look at processing costs. You've seen this before from me, and we're looking at a wide range of processing costs depending on which kind of a processor you are, how efficient you are, where you're located. But if we look at the factors that are impacting this, and we talk about the level of mechanization, the scale of the plant, it does look as if larger scale up to 10,000 tons is better, but it's not absolutely essential. There are businesses at smaller scales doing well. The quality of the raw material, something that is the essence of cashew processing, particularly the post-harvest handling, labor skills and training, management of the process, and of course the use of byproducts, which is often forgotten or left till later, but it is an area that can really impact margins and profitability. So when we look at an African perspective on competitiveness and profitability in processing, we're looking at balancing the higher costs of processing, at least for now, against the lower costs of raw material sourcing, better quality kernels, traceability, and location. So if your profitability is based on having better quality, having traceability, and your location, it means you need to market based on those factors. And this is where the neglect of marketing has been a little bit of an Achilles heel for many African processors. But there are huge opportunities to change this. Improved RCN quality, use of byproducts, the reduction of waste, and marketing of premium quality kernels are just some of the ways to address this cost gap for the time being. Looking at the African processes and advantages. So the question we ask, do African processors have enough competitive advantages or unique selling points to sustain this revolution? I feel they do. A sustainable supply chain, real traceability. And that means real traceability, not something that's just stuck on a bag at the port. Faster, lower delivery of kernels, particularly into the European market. Fresher kernels. No one has appreciated this so far, but if you consider product grown in West Africa, by the time it reaches the supermarket via Vietnam, it could be a year old, it could be 18 months old. So many of us in Europe buying kernels in supermarkets have never actually tasted a fresh kernel. It's really interesting when you come back with some samples. I brought some samples from Benin back at the weekend, shared them with friends, family, 1 or 2 customers. Their reaction is incredible. Their reaction to the color, their reaction to the taste is remarkable. And the comparison, maybe we'll do that in one of these sessions. We'll have a look at some pictures of products and compare, but their reaction is, wow, I never knew cashews could taste like this. Genuine supply chain certification. Obviously, it's very difficult to have a supply chain certification based on international trade in RCN. That's just a fact. That's just the nature of that supply chain. And of course, for buyers, the opportunity to be part of the story, to make a difference, to be part of the African processing revolution and the positive social and economic impact that that's having. We should ask, why now? Why has this happened now? And if we look at a whole range of factors, first of all, from a buyer's point of view, the concern with sustainability is really become a major factor. Now, maybe last year it was pushed back a little bit by a little bit of panic on cost of living. But if we look at it, African processors can process competitively, and the technology now makes that possible. They can deliver that sustainability. If we look at the sustainability of the international RCN chain, it's clear that this is becoming more and more costly in terms of freight, energy, but also in terms of its environmental impact and the famous carbon footprint. So we're looking at a chain that is not sustainable and is not traceable. Despite many, many efforts to make RCN traceable, it's very difficult. I think probably impossible to make the international trade in raw cashew nuts traceable in the true legal meaning of the word, particularly within the European Union. So the message from African processors is our cashews are sustainable, natural and taste great. And for buyers, will you pay a higher price? Is it worth paying that premium? Is it worth paying the premium in the way that buyers in the Middle East or in Japan or in China or in some segments of the market in Europe are prepared to pay higher prices for traceable, sustainable, great tasting cashew kernels? So is it a revolution? So I've been working with Pro Cashew on some different projects, mostly related to policy, and we worked out some key performance indicators for cashew processing development. So I just thought I might apply these overall and just see where the strengths, where the weaknesses of this revolution that we're seeing. First factor of 4 is processed volume. We'd also look at cashew processing plant efficiency, labor and management, and the impact in the value chain. So there are a number of factors there. Let's have a look at them. So is there an increase in the percentage of the crop processed? Certainly, almost everywhere. Is there an increase in the number of operational plants? Yes, almost everywhere. Is there an increase in the prices achieved? Yes, not for everyone, but on average, certainly prices for African cashew kernels are better, for the reasons we've spoken about, than equivalent prices in Vietnam, but still below the premium Indian kernel prices. Plant efficiency, capacity utilization. Okay, this is a real issue. Yes, some people are getting up to a high level of utilization. Let's say the target might be 85%. Hardly anyone is getting there. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. Unit cost of processing is still relatively high. The lowest I've heard is $380 a ton, which is very good. But I hear many, many people talking about much higher numbers. And that's related to a whole range of issues like those we've been talking about this morning. Labor and management. Yes, the numbers employed have improved. Cashew processing is not the mass employer that it once was, but it still is a significant employer. management capacity moving in the right direction. We can track the steps. The ability of managers, the level of training, their experience is improving, but it is, let's say, a work in progress, as is the level of training available. We see in some countries programs, initiatives to train managers and workers for cashew factories, but in others that is still being spoken about without action. It is one of the things that differentiated the development of the Vietnamese cashew sector. We're going back 25 years now, but it was one of the key things. That linking of technology to management was a real catalyst in developing the Vietnamese cashew sector, not to be forgotten. Looking at the value chain, do African cashew kernels meet buyers' requirements? Yes, they do. Is the supply chain integrated? No, not at all. This is an area that needs real work. When I talk about an integrated supply chain, what I mean is that the processor is connected to a farmer group, a co-op, that they have regular interaction, that they have mutual understanding, and that they have an opportunity to do business both sides. Processors doing their job well will normally improve the opportunity for farmers. Good farming will improve the profitability of processors, which in turn improves the price they can pay. There are some outstanding examples, but for the most part, the integration of the supply chain is still very much a work in progress. Impact and sustainability, it is having an impact that you can see. I sat in a room last week in Benin and I could see the impact of the development of processing. All the other countries across West Africa, you can see the same thing. Sustainability, it's clear that the environmental sustainability of the cashew sector is improved by origin processing. There's lots of data on that. Good stuff can be found on the ComCashew website. That's the MOVE project. There's elsewhere you can see other work on how local processing, growing and processing, or origin processing as it's become known, impacts sustainability. And not only environmental sustainability, also financial sustainability, economic sustainability. So is it a revolution or another false dawn? Right now, it looks like a revolution. Right now, it looks like this development in processing has a solid foundation and will continue. But let's talk to a processor. So let's talk to James Mulhall. James is a director and founder of Coastal Nuts based in Mtwara. James, good morning.
Good morning, Jim. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good.
Thanks for joining us. I know you're busy getting that factory developing quickly. You're relatively new into the cashew business, at least in processing. I know you've been working on it for a long time. What brought you into the cashew business?
I initially was looking for an agricultural processing, agricultural product for agricultural processing and adding value. I was living and working in Uganda, and I was in that area of adding value to nuts, dried fruit, etc. And I was looking at peppers and different types of farming. And when I came across cashew nuts, that seemed like a good prospect.
So you're up and running. You've been running since, how long are you going now?
Finished commissioning around September.
You've been processing. Have you exported yet?
Not yet. We've exported. We're exporting to the US at the moment. So we've started. Containers have gone. So yeah, we're happy enough. It's going so at the moment. Going well.
Great. Congratulations. Exports to the US from Tanzania, they've been very low volume. It's nice to see that coming back. Tell us about the I know you were involved in a long planning and development process. How long was it? What were the kind of challenges that you faced? A lot of people must be in the same position now, looking at the cashew business. Tell us about your experience in planning and developing the project.
Yes, I definitely think I've earned my school fees in this process. I've probably, out of the top 10 things that you could do wrong, I definitely have done about 8 or 9 of them. It's trying to get the balance between economies of scale and scalability and how to go about it, and then getting financed for it. And getting financed for it really has to come from your own pocket. I spent a good bit of time negotiating with financial institutions, and that came to nothing really over a long period of time. So to invest and to begin and to start, you really just have to either take the money from your own pocket and add investors also. So then you have to figure out what's the scale versus the cost. So it's trying to get the happy medium. You mentioned it before about what scale do you need to aim for, and you said around 6 to 10,000 tons is what makes it viable, because you need to have in place your management cost. And if you're not able to afford the management and capability, you're not able to really exist, because without that skill and expertise at the different aspects and different levels, you are going to run into problems. Because technology for me, it was the most important part. And if you're buying into technology, you have to have a certain scalability. So understanding building a new factory versus buying the equipment, building a factory versus buying good quality equipment. We ended up not building the factory, but using an existing warehouse and putting the investment into the equipment so we could have good processing capabilities rather than anything else. It just took me a while to find that balance and then understand how much it would cost to invest to do it.
How long was the process, James?
Oh, I'd say the first time I looked at cashews as a possibility would have been about 8 years ago. And then by the time I understood what I wanted to do, then by the time you get investment in place, and even when you get investment in place, the time from investment to actually processing or commissioning a plant is about 2.5 years. So it's a long process.
You need a lot of patience and a lot of forbearance for this one, eh?
Absolutely, yeah. And you need to, basically, at the beginning, you need to be doing something else. You need to be doing whatever you're doing as an income and research, and look at it and see how you're going, because it's a process of ups and downs along the way. And then at some point, when you maybe have investment secured, then it's the time to go full tilt at it, because you're never going to last in between. So it's that time of when you jump from one to the other, and it's very, very time consuming before you jump, and then it's completely full on when you are doing it. And it will take a long time by the time you have investment in place till actually you're in a position where you can actually pay yourself salaries and stuff like that. So it is a long process.
You need to be thinking long term, and you need to be patient with this. Clearly, you've mentioned technology as a really important factor. What are the other factors that you would see as key factors for success in cashew processing?
Well, as a startup, there's startups happening all across the world. So as a startup, you need to have your financial plan as sharp as you can. So you really need to know all the costs involved and go back and back and back into your costing model to have your figures and have support of people that are in the industry who can help you understand what you're doing. So that's as a startup, as like all startups, that's what you need to do. So that's a starter. And then you need to build and understand what type of team you need around you. I've worked in East Africa for about 15 years now. So you have to understand what different aspects are required and to know that if you can't get that team together, that's really going to impinge on any of your ability to get up to any sort of scale, to get up to any sort of volume. This only really works when you're at above 5,000-6,000 tons of cashews. So you have to get from zero up to that, and then we're aiming to look at 10,000 tons, processing 10,000 tons of cashews. So it's your ability to get from zero up to the 5 or 6, and then move from the 6 up to the 10 is a challenge. So you need a management team that you can have that can support the business to do that, and that involves their ability, know-how, all different aspects of what you need, from finance to marketing to the actual processing of the cashews, and the understanding of the buying of the RCN and the whole process through. So you need all those aspects of management. So that's a key part of it.
Yeah, quite a task. We're talking to James Mulhall, the director of Coastal Nuts Tanzania, a new cashew processor in Mtwara, producing and now exporting really good. I've seen the samples, really good cashew kernels. James, what about on a personal level? You've talked about patience, forbearance. What would you say are the qualities needed to be an entrepreneur in the cashew business, a CEO of a startup cashew processor?
We've mentioned it before. We've mentioned patience, and definitely an understanding of the environment you're working in. I would have the experience of pulling a team together is very, very important. That's kind of your key thing, is to have be able to pull a team together and make that team work, because it's a team of people that are running the business, and we have good people on the ground as we speak who are all doing good work, and need to be able to support your staff in their ability to develop. The skill base is good, but you need to develop it for a cashew nut skill base. So it's the development and training of those people, and understanding to work with your team to develop them is very, very important. The second thing is the market. So you have to be able to get out and interact with the market and sell to the market, and understand the product you have, and try and understand your customer and what they need. Because if you're supplying something to a customer that doesn't need what you're supplying, or can't get any value from what you're supplying to them, that customer will become a price customer rather than an actual active interaction with your customer. So marketing and working with your customer and trying to understand your customer is key, because unless you're selling, you can process and have all the technology you want, and unless you're selling with a margin, I'll call, because you can always sell. Selling with a margin, yes. It's not going to work for you. Like any business anywhere across the world.
Yeah, it's not just about moving product; it's about moving product and sustaining the business.
Yeah.
I know that the regulation in Tanzania has changed quite a lot over the last 2 years. Have you been able to develop your supply chain contacts?
Yeah. Regulation has changed, and it's positive for us. As most of you will know, the Tanzanian RCN purchasing is very structured and it's done through auction systems. But as a processor, you are allowed to go to the co-ops and not go directly to the auctions. You don't save on all the expenses by any means, but it is a better system for the processor to be able to go to the co-ops. There is some price reduction in it. It's not insignificant, but at the same time, it's not significant. However, it also, and importantly, allows you to start the process of developing your supply chain, because you can go to co-ops and work with the co-ops and begin the process, which we've only begun and we've only started, of developing supply chain understanding with the farmers. We're lucky in Tanzania that we have good cashews. They're good quality. Now, when we're competing with West Africa, the cashew RCN is more expensive than in Tanzania than it is in West Africa for the most part. So we have good cashews. It costs us a little bit more to buy them, but it also makes it easier to process good cashews than it is poorer quality cashews. So we're able to use the technology to our benefit of the good cashews to make more of a return. Because even if the cashews are of poor quality, even with all the technology, it still is more difficult to process the cashews. And I'm saying this as in a new processor, that is we're talking about the strategy here rather than my experience, because it'll take another year or two before what I'm talking about actually, whether that works as I'm hoping it will.
I think it's something that needs attention in every country, the quality of the cashew kernels and obviously the impact of the raw material on the overall profitability of the business is enormous. James, thanks very much indeed. Let's and let me add congratulations to you and to all of your team on getting up and running in Tanzania, reversing the trend in Tanzania, because processing had been slipping away a little bit. Congratulations. I wish you all the very best in the future. I feel that there is a great opportunity in Tanzania for Coastal Nuts. You might type your email address into the chat in case anyone wants to talk to you.
Sure.
And meantime, let's see, as time is moving on, let's go back to Blessing and see if there are any questions. Blessing.
Thanks, Jim.
Hello, Jim. Yeah, there are a few questions here, but before we move to the question, someone wants a clarification saying, I thought EU retail is only about price. If you could clarify.
Well, that's a very good point. EU retail is generally about sustainability, quality, packaging, and all those other factors until you talk to a retailer about doing a deal. And then all of a sudden it just becomes about price. It's very true. An often case in Europe, you find that the retailers, they want everything and they want the price. It's very true. But at the same time, there seems to be strong indication that buyers in Europe and consumers in Europe are much more, partly due to the law. And if we look at the laws on traceability and responsibility introduced in Germany on January 1st this year, partly due to the law, but partly due to consumer demand, generally speaking, European buyers are prepared to pay a slightly higher price or a higher price to meet those factors. And I think that trend is much stronger in Europe. That's not to say that negotiating with a supermarket is easy. It's certainly not something I would want to be doing, because they're very strong on price. But having said that, the indications are that the European market is more likely to pay for the kind of factors where Africa has a competitive advantage. And I think the market share development tends to show that in recent years. But a very good point, of course. Obviously, someone who has experience with supermarkets. Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim, for the clarification. So the next question is actually a lot of questions. from just an individual. It says, I'll read the first one. Thank you, Jim, for this session. The sustainability of this revolution. How can other continents support Africa, given that the raw material is in Africa?
Buy African cashew kernels, pay a reasonable price for them, support African cashew processors with technology, support African processors with know-how, and value the things that they're offering. We have been on a race to the bottom, both in terms of quality and price, for almost 15 years now in the cashew business. That has caused the supply chain to become unsustainable. That has caused the industry at times to become more and more volatile. And supporting a broader spread of the benefits of the industry across the continents, particularly to African countries where this product, or at least 56% of this product grows, would be a huge support. So do business in Africa, talk to African processors. To buyers, I would say, forget your preconceptions. African cashew kernels are high quality. African cashew processors, like James Mulhall, know what they're doing, and they're developing food safety, traceability, and other systems in line with buyers' needs.
Thank you very much, Jim. Before we go to the next question, if there is anybody who would like to interact directly with Jim, you may use the raise your hand feature and we will call you in. So the next question is, you talked about technology from Vietnam being a factor making this revolution possible. Can there be a cooperation to make available the technology and possibly maintenance training, as it has not been smooth?
Yeah, I agree with this. I mean, look, it's for sure that the purchase and identification of technology has become a lot easier. But issues such as commissioning, training of staff, servicing, supply of spare parts have all been big issues and continue to cause problems for processors right across the continent of Africa. And actually, also there are issues back in some of the countries where the machines originate. Governments have tried to encourage suppliers of machines to open outlets for servicing and maintenance in their countries. One of the key factors is, as we reach a scale, as we get to a point where there are enough factories in particular countries, and probably Côte d'Ivoire is already there, it becomes commercially viable for suppliers of machines to offer local servicing and supply of spare parts. In the meantime, that remains a big challenge. But, there are huge challenges in this. And I think it's also important for processors, when they set up, to negotiate supplies of spare parts, to negotiate service agreements that will stick. We can expect that there will be huge demands in the coming years on suppliers of cashew technology, cashew machines. As India tends toward mechanization, as African processing grows, those factories making the machines will be under pressure. It's really important to negotiate good deals with them. But I do think that this is a problem that will eventually disappear, in so much as that the scale will allow either new businesses to import and supply servicing and spare parts, or allow the manufacturers to supply those parts as part of the contract. For now, it needs some tough negotiation with suppliers to make sure that those things are included. Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim. The next question is, how can other countries learn from Côte d'Ivoire?
Well, there's certainly a lot to be learned in Côte d'Ivoire. The development of processing has been strong. It's been so far relatively successful. We can learn from the successes and from the mistakes. So I would look at areas of government support, areas of NGO activity in support of processing. I would look at scale, which factories have worked, which factories have not worked. I would look at those factories that have developed their supply chains. How has that worked? I would look at the management of byproducts, how some people have managed their byproducts, others have failed to do so. And I would look at the impact of programs for training, and we see some of those programs going on now. There's a lot positive to be learned in Côte d'Ivoire, and I think that there is a willingness to talk about that there too. So I would say go. There's Sieta, for example, coming up over the weekend after next. You can talk to processors, visit, talk to CCA. You can learn quite a lot. There's a lot to be learned elsewhere too. And one of the key things for me would be that we would improve the dialogue between countries, between processors. African Cashew Alliance is in a good position to do that. Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim. And the next question is, what do you think of the ban of land movement of RCN across Africa?
Well, it is banned, or it is illegal in some areas. The key difficulty in banning anything is, can you enforce it? So it's certainly, it's clear that product moves across borders informally or illegally at the moment, even in cases where that is banned. I can see the logic for banning it, but there are also cases where the product is moving toward its, let's say, logical export point. So it's moving toward the nearest port. It's moving toward an area where it is going to cost the least to export. But that sometimes involves a loss of revenue to governments on export tax. So we have a whole range of issues here. We have a ban that might cause product to move further to the point of export. We have a ban that might cause the retention, or in a case of failure of enforcement, a situation where you have governments losing revenue, differences in export taxation, for example. A simple ban only works if it can be enforced. Otherwise, we're just paying lip service to a problem. So I think that more cooperation between governments, for example, that product should move to its logical port, to the nearest port, to the most efficient port for export, but it can do so in transit. And the tax should be paid. The law should be adhered to. So I think that it's difficult to argue for a blanket ban on land movement. Obviously, some countries are landlocked. It's difficult to say that there should be no ban on movement across borders. But what I think we can say is that perhaps governments should be talking to each other to investigate what's the most logical way to manage this, and certainly to discourage informal trade, because bottom line is that in the long run doesn't help anyone. Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim. The next question, I believe, is addressed to James. James, if you're still online, are you planning to get EU organic certification for the cashews as well as coastal nuts? Is that of interest commercially?
Yes, is the quick answer to that. The one thing and the one big advantage in Tanzania is the quality of the cashew nuts. We have really, really good quality. The standards of Benin, our specifications on color and taste are excellent, and up to levels of India. So to add organics to that would be very positive, and something that takes a good bit of investment, but yes, definitely something we're interested in doing, because we have the good quality, add the organics to it, and then you have a product that will niche market is the only thing that it would be because of the quality and the quality and being organics. But yes, it's definitely something we'd like to do.
Thank you very much, James. Jim, back to you. There's another question for you. What about the roasted cashew kernel and finer products in this revolution?
Well, we're certainly seeing businesses develop value-added products, roasted cashews, and other processed products. It is a a much more difficult challenge in terms of international marketing of a consumer-packed product, for example. And there are successful examples. Tolaro Global comes to mind in Benin, but there are others too. If we look at this overall, we could probably look at it as part of the journey. Certainly the destination might be that processed roasted cashew kernels and final product would be exported, processed at origin. But my own thinking is that that journey has to start with getting the basic processing right, getting the export of natural kernels right, establishing the brand, establishing the good name of the quality, traceability, and other factors for cashew kernels from individual countries. Once that's established, I think there's a great opportunity. Meantime, it would be beneficial and profitable, I think, to develop roasted cashew kernels and other products for domestic markets, probably more in some countries than in others. Nigeria, again, is a huge market for consumer packs. Businesses in those countries can gain their experience in their domestic market and then expand into international markets. I think also that we shouldn't forget that across Africa, there are countries that don't produce cashew nuts that might offer opportunities for consumer packed goods. So it has a place to play. I think it's a much greater marketing challenge. And I think that depending on scale and depending on experience, it's something that should be considered, but considered maybe as part of a process that starts with the process and export of the natural kernels. Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim. The next question is, do I really need certification to export kernels to India or Europe?
Well, certification is a very broad subject. So we've all different kinds of certification. So let's just talk about what do you need to export to the European market, for example. You're certainly going to need some form of food safety, quality management system certification. A very minimum quality management system would be to have a HACCP, a CCP system in place. But really nowadays, processors focused on the European market should be thinking about a BRC certification and ISO 22000 in that range, a relatively high level of certification for food safety. Certification is about managing risk. So we need to certify that the process through which the kernels are produced is safe for consumers. If we do that, we can reach markets. You may well be able to export without any quality management system certification in place, but you will probably find that you're going to have to accept a lower price. You're probably going to be talking to buyers that are working on a much more cautious, perhaps in an ad hoc trade way. So it will change the way your business works. So I would say, ideally, go for a high level of certification, but as a minimum, put a HACCP system in place as the foundation on which to build good quality management. Become a food ingredients supplier. Don't be a trader, because that's the road to low prices, uncertainty in the future. So I would say, yes, you do need to have some form of food safety certification, but you do not need to have certifications like organic certification and other supply chain certifications to enter those markets at this point in time. Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim. That will be all the questions from the audience, but I do have two questions to ask. What should we expect? What would change? Is there any shifts that we should be expecting from now to the next GNE? I don't feel we're going to see anything particularly dramatic over the next couple of weeks. If we're talking about a shift, I don't think we're going to see. Well, I think we will see continued modest buying of kernels. I think raw cashew nut prices may well slip a little bit further over that period. I think Western buyers might be relatively quiet
over the Easter holiday, which is the weekend after next, and they may well come back after that and take another look. The next, let's say, window of activity is probably likely to be toward the end of April, early May, and I expect that buyers would come in for some cover then. RCN wise, I think there'll be steady trade, but I'm not a speculator. I'm not seeing the market likely to spike up on RCN in that period. So all going well. The weather in West Africa will continue to be good. The harvest will continue to flow, and processors will get the opportunity to continue to buy raw material at prices that work both for the farmers and for the processors themselves. Back to you, Blessing.
Thank you very much, Jim. And can we already know the topic for the next session of GME?
Well, the next session's a little bit uncertain, isn't it? So I'm thinking that we might take a look at this subject. We're going to talk about markets. Whenever it is, we're going to talk about markets. We always do. By then, we might see some further developments. What I think we might have a look at is certification, process, supply chain. Might have a look at the different forms of certification and just see what that means for processors and exporters. We're always getting questions on this during the sessions, and maybe it'd be a good idea just to try and drag all that together and give people an impression of what these different certifications mean.
Thank you very much. I hand over to you to probably get the last words from James before we call the session to an end.
Hello?
Hello, James?
Yes.
Okay, maybe
Sorry. Go ahead, Blessing.
Yes, please. Do you have any final words or concluding remarks before we bring the session to an end whilst we wait for James to join us?
Okay, I'm relatively new to cashew nut processing, but I would encourage others to get into processing. Yes, it takes a long time. Yes, there's plenty of ups and downs, but with the right technology, the right management team, and especially in Tanzania, we have good quality cashew nuts grown by good farmers. Once we match the quality we have with the marketplace and not get into a complete price competition, as Jim just said there, about becoming not getting focused totally on price and delivering what a customer needs, then hopefully we will be successful. If you see me back on this in a couple of years' time, that will be proof that it's going well. So
absolutely.
Thanks very much, Jim, for giving me the opportunity to chat here.
Thanks, James. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, cheers.
Jim, do you have any concluding remarks before we draw the curtain?
Just to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to talk cashews. Stay in touch and hopefully see you again in a couple of weeks. Take care in the meantime and be careful in this market. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Jim and James. Dear participants, James has left his contact details in the chat. If you would like to engage him further, you would find his contact in the chat. And James also on your screen. Without taking much time, I would like to thank our partners and sponsors who have made it possible for us to bring you another session of the ACO Global Market Encounter with Jim Fitzpatrick. I would also like to inform us that we have a date for the 17th ACA Annual Cashew Conference and Expo, as seen on your screen, which is the 18th to the 21st of September 2023. We ask that you mark your calendars and look out for when registration is open. Thank you very much and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Africa. A continent thriving with opportunities. 70% of the world's cocoa, 53% of the world's cashew. The resource-rich continent is at a turning point. By 2030, Africa will be home to 20% of the world's population and 75% of people aged under 35. Yet, across the continent, some dynamics persist. The continent continues to export raw natural resources at low cost. Meanwhile, the resilience of its economies is tested by unemployment, poverty, and a global pandemic. Despite the challenges, together we can unlock this potential. At Arise IIP, our vision is to build an African industry. Our ambition is to shift Africa from a global commodity supplier to a global manufacturing powerhouse. We do this by identifying industrial gaps in African countries. We then design tailor-made infrastructure and solutions to enable the sustainable and local transformation of raw materials. In Gabon, where 85% of the land is covered by dense and pristine rainforest, we created from scratch a vibrant local timber industry. It did not happen overnight. We brought together local timber industry players and attracted foreign investors to create a competitive timber processing ecosystem. For this ecosystem to flourish, we attracted foreign investors, establishing linkages across the whole value chain, organizing trade shows for hosted companies to showcase and market their timber products, and boosting exports. GSE's Wood Cluster is now composed of 90 companies operating from the first to the third transformation of timber. All of them transforming ethically and sustainably sourced Gabonese wood. In less than 10 years, Gabon shifted from a net log exporter to the first exporter of veneer in Africa and second in the world. In fact, the real impact was much wider and more meaningful. With GSES, Arise IIP has created 16,000 jobs, attracted 120 investors coming from 18 different countries, operating in 19 industry sectors. In Togo, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire, our work is underway, following the same approach. Cotton, cashew, soya, cocoa. We enable the transformation of local agricultural products with modern infrastructures and integrated logistics services. By investing in local manufacturing, we ultimately seek to replace foreign imports with domestic production. In all our endeavors, we are driven by the pursuit of green, sustainable growth, one that can last for generations to come. We are the pioneer of a green, responsible industrialization, one that ensures gender diversity, sustainability, traceability, and a zero-waste policy. This is why we create innovative solutions that support a climate-conscious economic development in Africa. This starts with neutralizing carbon emissions and creating a positive environmental legacy. By 2022, all of Arise IIP's industrial zones will be carbon neutral, powered fully by solar technology. This is all made possible by the dedication and commitment of the women and men who work at Arise. Together, we are on a journey to build an African industry, a journey to create a better, more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive future for everyone. Arise IIP, committed to making Africa thrive.
Dans ce contexte actuel de crise sanitaire mondiale liée à la pandémie de la COVID-19, il s'avère fondamental de relever la participation des femmes dans tous les maillons de la production, d'encourager et de renforcer leur leadership et leur résilience pour favoriser leur autonomisation, surtout dans le domaine économique. TechnoServe Bénin et l'Agence territoriale de développement agricole Pôle 4 s'inscrivent activement dans cette dynamique. À cet effet, le 15 et 16 octobre 2020, s'est tenue dans la salle de conférence de l'ATDA Pôle 4 à Parakou une cérémonie de célébration de la Journée internationale de la femme rurale édition 2020. Cette journée a pour objectif de définir les modalités de mise en œuvre d'une stratégie de renforcement du leadership et d'une résilience plus accrue des femmes dans les différentes activités de développement socio-économique.
Dans la plupart des décisions, ces femmes-là ne bénéficient pas des avantages qui sont liés au développement économique de chaque pays. Donc, pour les valoriser davantage, la communauté internationale a dédié la journée du 15 octobre pour les célébrer. Comme nous sommes en partenariat avec des projets, programmes, ils ont décidé de nous accompagner pour pouvoir célébrer l'événement au niveau local. Ces femmes-là sont aussi présentes surtout au niveau du maillon transformation. C'est pourquoi nous leur avons demandé de ne pas venir seulement pour écouter les discours, mais qu'elles viennent avec leur chef-d'œuvre pour qu'on puisse voir ce qu'elles font et les gens vont aussi profiter pour se ravitailler.
En effet, dans sa stratégie de renforcement des capacités des acteurs de la filière cajou, Technoserve, à travers Bénin Cajou, fournit des assistances techniques spécifiques et appropriées à la satisfaction des besoins des partenaires du public et du privé afin de promouvoir la production des noix brutes d'anacarde, le développement des chaînes de valeur et l'amélioration des revenus, notamment ceux des femmes.
Les braves femmes rurales sont effectivement à l'honneur aujourd'hui. Nous les félicitons et nous les exhortons à mettre leur résilience au service de nos communautés en cette période de pandémie. Et nous voulons les rassurer du soutien de Technoserve pour une plus grande intégration du genre dans les chaînes de valeur de la filière anacarde.
Rappelons qu'au cours de cette messe agricole et rurale de haute facture, diverses autorités ont accompagné l'ATDA et Technoserve à accélérer les meilleures innovations des produits dérivés du cajou et renforcer les aptitudes des femmes leaders et résilientes dans la filière cajou. Aussi faut-il le souligner, l'ambiance a été motivante et festive, marquée par 2 temps forts, portant notamment sur les réflexions et les partages d'expériences sur la résilience des femmes dans la chaîne de valeur anacarde et l'exposition vente des meilleures innovations réussies en faveur des femmes dans le développement socio-économique.
C'est grâce à Bénin Cajou que ça a été organisé dans le Nord, précisément à Parakou, et ça a permis aux femmes des 2 Nord de participer. Je veux dire à Takora Donga, Borgo, Albori, Zoukoline, le centre aussi. Voilà pourquoi je tiens à remercier très sincèrement Bénin Cajou. Et cette séance aujourd'hui nous a permis de partager les expériences des autres femmes. C'est déjà un plus pour nous. Et pour nous qui sommes arrivés, je nous demande à notre retour de passer l'information à celles qui ne sont pas venues, pour qu'elles puissent aussi être informées de ce que nous sommes venus faire. C'est ce qui manque souvent. Et ça fait que les informations, nous les gardons, et les autres n'ont plus d'informations aussi. Ça ne permet pas un développement du groupe. Donc je nous demande de souvent communiquer, de partager l'information avec les autres femmes aussi de nos groupes.
Notons que dans la vision de travailler pour une véritable accélération et intégration de la filière cajou au Bénin, avec une part conséquente pour les femmes, l'intégration du genre constitue l'un des principaux axes d'intervention de Technoserve via le projet Bénin Cajou.
Le projet Bénin Cajou a inscrit dans ses priorités, à compter de l'année 2019, des activités pour la sensibilisation des acteurs en vue d'une meilleure prise en compte de l'intégration du genre dans les différents maillons de la production. C'est à ce titre qu'après avoir milité en amont par un plaidoyer auprès de la FENAPAB pour l'amendement des textes en faveur d'une plus grande intégration du genre, Bénin Cajou a soutenu en aval le processus de renouvellement des organes de gestion de la FENAPAB, qui s'est achevé le 23 septembre 2019 avec l'élection à sa tête d'une femme, Madame Saadatou Atta Kakayachi, en tant que présidente du conseil d'administration.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, Les impressions sont bonnes, surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
Mariée et mère de 3 enfants, Madame Saadatou est propriétaire de 5 plantations d'anacardiers de 7 hectares et demi à Pénésoulou dans la commune de Bassila, à 372 km de Cotonou. Entrée dans la production du cajou depuis 1998 et précédemment chef quartier, cette mère dévouée gère en subsidiaire son restaurant, son commerce de savon et mène des œuvres sociales en faveur des orphelins de son arrondissement. Brave et vaillante, elle exhorte son équipe et les femmes dans la filière cajou à se battre pour pousser loin la filière.
Pour réussir ma mission, c'est un engagement efficace de l'équipe. Ensuite aussi, il y a la disponibilité que toutes les femmes adhèrent aux coopératives de leur localité, entretenir bien les champs disponibles, celles qui n'en ont pas encore n'ont qu'à produire et surtout faire la vente groupée.
Le directeur général de la Fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin, FENAPAB, explique ici les raisons qui ont soutenu cette action d'éclat.
Par les hommes. Déjà en septembre 2019, les hommes et les femmes ont souhaité mettre maintenant les femmes à la tête de cette organisation pour gérer ces 2 organes-là, conseil d'administration et conseil de surveillance.
La commune de Bassila n'est pas restée en marge de ce processus car la mairie s'est illustrée récemment dans des actes forts en faveur des femmes pour la filière cajou.
Il faut dire que c'est un honneur pour nous et une fierté de savoir que une dame de ma commune
même pourquoi pas le triple du tonnage antérieur, et ensuite qu'on puisse transformer plus de la moitié de ces produits au niveau local chez nous pour le plein essor de cette filière. Les activités à mener, c'est de continuer le plaidoyer envers le public, les privés, dans le renforcement des capacités.
Cashew is an increasingly important crop for the countries in West Africa. For Benin, it's their second most valuable export. And we saw this big potential to grow and increase more.
Le cajou arrive en seconde place après le coton. À 110 000, 120 000 tonnes, en 2 ans, nous sommes passés à 120, 130, 140 000 tonnes. L'objectif du gouvernement, c'est d'aller à 300 000 tonnes à la fin du quinquennat.
Cashew me permet de vivre. Au moment où je n'avais pas suivi avec Cashew Bénin, les 2 hectares font 5 sacs. Et maintenant, avec Cashew Bénin, je vends 15 sacs cette année. Le projet nous a appris beaucoup de choses.
Il a formé 10 personnes, dont 9 femmes et 1 homme.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes. Surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacards du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
Technicien travaille avec des hommes et des femmes pour bâtir des fermes et des entreprises compétitives qui contribuent à la réduction de la pauvreté, à l'augmentation de la résilience des bénéficiaires et de leur communauté. Nous restons convaincus que